Hey folks, it's Tim. I've got another video review for you today. This time I'm covering DSTE Technology's BG-E13 grip. This is the grip that's designed for Canon's EOS 6D. And before we get into that, it did come in this generic cardboard box that doesn't even feature their company name on here. Just says for Canon EOS 6D and some generic model number there. So the grip did arrive inside this bubble wrap, and there was additional cardboard here to prevent the contents from shifting during transport. There are two battery plates for it, so the one that contains 6 AA cells is already installed in the grip itself. This is the plate for 2 lithium-ion cells use, which I'll get into a bit later. And last but not least, it did have this very detailed instructions that are written in fluent English that one can fully understand and, diagram in full details. Now, digging into the grip itself, it did come with a protective cover for the electrical contacts that will ultimately go inside of the camera. As with the rest of my camera grip reviews, the number one consideration for ordering an aftermarket grip is, of course, the price, because the original one for Canon, the BG-E13, I think if I'm not mistaken, runs at least $2.50. This one ordered off of Amazon.com runs in its mid-40s, and with the price, of course, comes the consideration whether or not the grip will function properly with the camera, as well as how tough it is and how the quality is. So this is the third grip that I'm reviewing from them. The first one I purchased for my D7100, which I actually no longer have. I recently reviewed the MB-D14 for the Nikon D600, and finally I'm reviewing this one because I was contemplating between the two systems, the EOS 6D and as well as the D600. So without further ado, digging into this, let's start off with the quality first. I'm going to disclaim right away that I've never handled the original grip, so I don't know how it is in direct relation to that, but at least I can glean pretty much how the quality is just by looking at how Canon implemented their design elements as well as the rubber covering, how it fits, the fit and finish overall versus this grip. So starting with the Canon EOS 6D, and looking at the areas where the rubber meets the plastic molding, you will see that pretty much it is perfectly fit and flush, and there is no glue overrun on any areas there. And that pretty much continues here as well. So obviously something you would expect of a camera running upwards of over 1K, but let's see if the DSTE grip can match that. So right away I noticed that there is some glue overrun right there. As you can see, that's the shiny part right there. But for the most part, perhaps maybe a teensy little bit right there. But in terms of the finish, how it matches along and whether it fits flushly with the plastic grip itself, it's pretty good. It's not too bad. I mean, this is pretty much what I've come to expect from them based upon the other two grips that I've reviewed so far. Over here is a tiny spot where perhaps it doesn't fit perfectly flush. And again, maybe some glue overrun there. And overall, the finish looks very similar to the EOS 6D, if perhaps this faux rubber looks a little bit glossier versus the more dull matte finish of the original grip. So there is some difference there, whereas on the D600 it matched a little bit better, as well as on the D7100 grip as well. So wrapping up the rest of the edges here, so far nothing blatantly wrong with it. And perhaps not as well flushed there, but again, not something that I feel would, peel off or anything like that. The next thing I'd like to confirm is whether or not this tripod mount is mounted to a full metal backing plate, because that would give one some assurance in terms of the support once you do have the entire camera and perhaps a heavy lens mounted onto a tripod. So getting the 6 AA cells holder removed, you can see that it did come with a drying pack. And again, I like to highlight these things because it just goes to show that a company truly cares about their products. It's the little touches that I always feel like, hey, you know what? They really didn't have to do that, but it showed that they went that extra step to really, instill a sense that they care about their products and they're delivering a quality product. Now, as for the latching mechanism itself, it doesn't feel very smooth. It kind of feels like once you reach the extreme edge, it kind of stays there. There is no grease on here, but I suppose one could probably dab a little bit on there. But at least this latch itself is metal, as you can see there. And that metal portion latches onto this metal, which is one single solid piece running the entire length of the bottom here. You probably can't see very clear, so I'm going to just go ahead and illuminate this. Sorry, the white balance is going to be off because I currently have this set on manual for compact fluorescent light, but for the LED, yeah, it does have a blue cast, but you should be able to see that full metal plate running the entire length, and not just one thin strip, but it covers the entire bottom portion of that grip. I really like the fact that the latching mechanism goes onto this metal piece again that runs the full length. So far so good. I'm liking what I see. Now the next thing I'm going to do is probably take this thing apart, as with the D600 plates and the D7100, to get inside here to see how this gear mechanism is held down. And one thing I always like to highlight is John Moyer's experience with one of his aftermarket grips. It was a Pixel one, and the reason I like to mention it is because on his particular model there was a metal mounting plate. This was for a D7100 grip. It was only held together by melted plastic that held it down, whereas on the DSTE grips they were actually held in place by screws. So I'm going to get this apart later and show you that. In terms of installation, if you've never installed one of these grips before, pretty much you would need to remove this entire battery latch, and there is this little latch mechanism here that you slide and you angle it out. So you remove the entire battery cover, remove the battery itself. Now one really neat feature I really like about this grip is that you could actually slot the battery cover right there. So that way you don't lose it. This entire thing goes into the slot for the original battery. Now usually once I get to reasonably hand tight, I like to just apply a little downward pressure and just turn it just a little bit tighter to take up any remaining slack. Next thing is to mount the battery into place. It's a simple matter of pretty much angling it with the metal tabs down first. I don't believe it matters which slot it goes into, and then just simply depressing it until you hear it lock. Then taking the entire mechanism and just simply sliding it into the corresponding slot, latching it, and closing it. So that seems to be pretty sturdy in place. Now one thing I didn't cover before though was that on the lithium ion plate there is a rubber cover here. So this is for use with the optional AC adapter. You could simply remove that. The AC adapter with a full battery goes into there, and that wire runs out so you can run off of AC power. So now that it's installed, I'm going to go ahead and test to see if there's any flexing. And if there's any particular location that there would be flex is at the extreme edges that's furthest away from the mount. So right now I'm going to just go ahead and apply some pressure here. And as you can see, there's very little flexing. So it does feel very solid. There is almost no flexing whatsoever with this particular grip. Now we're going to test the functionality of this grip. So as you can see, it didn't really matter where I had previously installed it. It does recognize the grip, the battery, and it was, like I said, in that first slot. I'll test it out to see if the slot actually matters, but I don't believe so because I believe that wiring is in parallel. So the first thing we're going to test is the shutter button. So let me go ahead and get that out of focus. Half press. Okay. There we go. I would say the 60s shutter button has a distinct stop, so that way you know what is a half press and what is a full press. Although I prefer the one on the D600 actually, but in terms of the grip, there's that particular sound once you hit that half stop. So let me actually go ahead and shut off the camera so you could listen to that for yourself. However, there's a very fine line between that and the actual picture taking. Half press, full press, half press, full press. So it doesn't quite feel as good as perhaps the original one, but of course this can be subjective. I mean, everybody might have a different take on what a shutter button should feel like, but I kind of feel like it's easy to perhaps apply a little bit too much force and take a picture versus just focusing. Next thing we're going to want to test is the main command dial. So the command dial on the 60 is rubberized. It's got a very nice feel to it, as with most of the high-end digital SLRs, but the one on this grip is just purely plastic. Although this one feels like it's kind of got a little bit more bite to it than the one I tested on the MB-D14 and 15. So it's not too bad, but it's very loud. Again, I would have liked the feeling of the original rubber versus this just pure plasticky feel. In terms of operation, I do currently have this set in aperture variety. So we're going to go ahead and just test out to see whether or not how accurate and responsive it is. It's overall fairly responsive, as you can see. If I scroll 2 times, 2 stops, 3 stops, 2 stop, 1 stop. So it is very accurate in that sense. There's no jumping around that I can discern. So next up, we're going to test the autofocus on button. So as you can see, no issues there. The auto exposure autofocus lock button. So as you can see, that star indicates that exposure is locked right now. It's locked again. Doesn't matter if I obscure the view. You see the exposure values do not change. So that's fine. And last but not least, the autofocus selector button. This is a little tricky because you need to see it here. Press that. I'm actually going to use the command dial on the grip. So as you can see, no issues with this button. With the grip installed and the original battery inside, accessing the battery info does show that there is a grip installed, the percentage, and it works flawlessly. Next, I'm going to test to see if the battery can run from this slot as well. So one thing to keep in mind is that both of the metal tabs always faces towards the middle. So don't think that they both run in the same direction this way, but it is installed this way. So as you can see, the camera has powered up. We're going to check the battery info, and this now indicates that it's using the right battery with the icon displayed on the bottom instead. I unfortunately don't have another battery to test with, so I can't check both slots at the same time, but at least this does show you that the battery can be in either slot. And last but not least, we're going to go ahead and test this with the 6 AA's installed. Now this plastic, it's designed in such a way that I kind of feel that it may potentially be brittle in cold weather, so I'm going to get this outside, and what perfect timing because right now temperatures have dropped into the teens here in the northeast US, so this perfect opportunity to test this out. While installing the batteries, one needs to be very mindful of the polarity because one is usually accustomed to having the little spring tabs to indicate that that's the negative end. However, these are just all tabs. So it kind of looks like, you know, one of those positive tabs. So I'm usually accustomed to having a spring on one end for the negative, a tab for the positive, but this one, the only indication are these tiny little imprints down here that tells you the polarity. So on the bottom, these batteries are installed to the extreme right of the bottom side. So the right battery goes positive tips towards the insertion end, and then on the left side is actually negative end towards the insertion end. Unlike the Nikon grips, there is no indication whether or not you have a lithium ion tray in there or the AA, because they're on the Nikon grips, they were color-coded, the green for lithium ions and the white for the AA's, whereas on this one, they're both identical. So if you have both of them inside your camera bag, you wouldn't really be able to discern it until you pull it out. Not a big deal, but ultimately it just shows the thought process that went into each one from each company. So now that I have the 6 AA's installed, I'm going to go ahead and check out the battery info and see what can we glean from there. Given these are nickel metal hydrides, there is no smart lithium ion. It can't tell you the remaining capacity via percentage except through this bar here, which I assume is probably extrapolating from the remaining voltage. No shutter count or recharge performance indication either. So even if I went ahead and just snapped a pic, those are my blinds. come back in here to see the shutter count, it does not keep track of that. So regardless of whether it's lithium ion or not, the shutter count is inherent to the camera itself, so I don't see why they couldn't have kept track of that at least, even if it can't do the recharge performance and the remaining capacity, but in percentage, I should say. So I don't know, I think that's a rather strange omission. But in the end, it runs on 6 AA's and that's what counts. With the grip installed, we can now do a like-for-like comparison between the fit and finish of the 60's, again, rubber overlay on the plastic versus DSTE's implementation. So I already covered over about the glue overrun and whatnot, but this is really more about how does it integrate with the camera and how does it look. So this looks to me, like I said, I don't have the BG-E13 original one, but for all intents and purposes at first glance, if someone was walking around with this and I took a quick glance at it, I wouldn't be able to tell that this was an aftermarket grip. I mean, it really does, overall fit and finish matches very well. Again, with the exception that this texture is just slightly glossier than that, but overall it doesn't look too bad though. It does integrate with the 60 very nicely and does offer a very nice beefy grip. Although the 60's grip I've always found to be very, very good, much better than the D600 or the D7100s. Just feel it's much more comfortable to hold and there's more ample room here. Again, I don't have large hands, I have medium-sized hands, but this just feels very, very nice in the hands. And with the grip installed, this does, again, give an additional level of comfort that I don't really even need that additional wrist strap. I feel that this is beefy and chunky enough that I have a very nice solid grip on this. So now I do have all the screws removed. However though, unlike the Nikon grips, this rubber actually overextends and is actually glued directly to this top plate, so I can't fully remove it. Sorry, I'm shooting this handheld, so however, I was able to get it pried enough such that you could see the metal plate that covers the gear, which is a very nice sight to behold, as well as the fact that it's being held down by actual screws. I know that's a little difficult to see, but that's that first black part in that corner, rounded corner right there of that silver plate. But it's not held together by melted plastic, but instead it is held down by actual screws. And taking a sneak peek under this side, it does look like the PC board is orderly. There are no sloppy soldering. I know it's a little hard to tell in the video, but upon my inspection of taking a peek under there visually, it does look to be in order though. This gives me a level of comfort that this is another quality product put out by DSTE. Of course, it does remain to be seen how well this grip holds up in the long run though. So as an initial conclusion, I feel like this is yet another solid release from DSTE. This is the third grip that I've reviewed, and overall, the quality, I'd probably give it a 4 out of 5. If there were two major weak points of this grip, it's this on-off switch. As you could probably hear that. It just feels very poor quality, and that's a little stiff getting up there, so this isn't exactly confidence inspiring. I mean, it does its job, but could have been a little bit refined. And the other thing was about the shutter button, but of course, again, this could be subjective, that I felt while the half press was fine, the full press could have just been a little bit firmer for my taste, at least. And last but not least, while this feels okay, I would have liked if this finish was identical to the 60's rubberized finish versus this plasticky one. Now, unlike the D600 one grip, this does, I feel like it has okay traction, but still ultimately it is smooth and it's plasticky. Overall flex is minimal. I feel it's aided by the extra arm that goes into the camera itself, so that lends additional support to the firmness. There is very, very little flex, and as previously mentioned, when I took it apart, I did get a good level of comfort with the metal plate being held down by the screws versus just melted plastic, and the fact that, you know, when you bolt this on, it's the additional screws on top of this plastic plate here that also holds the entire assembly down. So overall, I feel like, you know, quality is on par with the other two grips that I have reviewed thus far. In terms of aesthetics, as mentioned, this is a little bit more of a glossier finish than the standard, but could be subjective. Overall, it does match pretty well at first glance. It's only if you're really, really studying it and analyzing it can you notice the difference, whereas the plastic portion does match pretty much perfectly. Now, other little nitpicks may be things like there's a very tiny gap here and there was a ding here on the corner here, but again, that's being very nitpicky. But overall, I just feel bang for the buck, you'd be very hard pressed to do a lot better than this grip. Now, one thing I wasn't able to test is this particular thing, meaning since I can't get the grip fully apart, I don't know what is that being held on to, but I will test it by attaching either the strap or the wrist strap to it and giving it a go in the future and reporting back in my comments. One nice thing is that the base does stick out reasonably enough such that a lens like an 85mm can be mounted without it toppling forward, unlike on the D600. So bottom line is, if you're looking for a good grip for your 6D, I feel like this represents solid bang for the buck and overall quality is fairly good. Aside from the little nitpicks, it is a very solid choice. As part of FTC disclosures, the BG-E13 grip was provided by DSTE Technology for review. Thanks again for watching.